There are essentially two different types of success, by which I mean the way we achieve that success is different in each instance. In the first case, you're talking about success where you naturally flow with your own potential, and for you, this success will largely already be happening, and if it's not, then it'll be, we could say, in the pipeline, and it looks like it would be perfectly reasonable expectation that success is going to flow to you. In the other instance, however, what we're talking about is success where your natural potential has been repressed or constricted by the people around you through through judgmentalism, through constriction of your physiology, your nervous system, and your ability to be true to yourself. And so this is where the real bread and butter comes in terms of personal development, achieving success for the individual, where you're going to have to face feelings and emotions that have been constricted and shut down so that you can reclaim them and reclaim your true potential. And that really is the key to everything else that follows. It's the emotional freedom. So in this video, I'm going to explain exactly how you can have infinite emotional freedom and confidently face any emotion or feeling. So let's get down to it then. Infinite emotional freedom. And the first thing to understand is that there's not currently an entire consensus in psychological fields around whether emotions are things that happen in the body and feelings are things that happen in the mind, or vice versa. Now, actually, what we can realize is that we don't need to let this bother us. It doesn't need to be a problem, because we can simply consider two different things, and they are events of the mind and events of the body. If we think of things in those terms, then we don't need to get too caught up on whether emotions are in the body and feelings are in the mind, or vice versa. We can just think of emotions and feelings happen in one of two different places, in the mind or in the body. So with that awareness then, what we can also see is that there can only ever be one of two reasons why you wouldn't feel confident about facing an emotion or feeling. And they are either, one, that you can't get your head around it, or two, that you can't get your body around it. By which I mean, there's either some discomfort about facing some thoughts or some content of the mind, or there's some resistance or discomfort around what's going on in the body. So the next conclusion that we can make is that in order to have infinite emotional freedom, all we require are two more things, and they are, firstly, to allow the mind to be however it wishes to be. Whatever content arises in the mind can be fine. And the second is to allow the body to be whatever the body wishes to be, and allow that content to be fine. So we're going to go through those in a bit more detail in turn, and I'm going to start with the body. All young children naturally have the ability to allow their feelings and their emotions to pass through their body without resistance. So whether that be crying, shouting, screaming, expressing themselves, however, running around, any kind of physical movement, they have freedom and a capacity to deal with that because they are allowing themselves to flow with whatever's happening in their body. And of course, you were a child once, so that applies to you. Now, what happens is that as you become an older child and then a teenager and then an adult, the society around you, possibly in your family and certainly in the wider society, will teach you the ways that it is not comfortable for you to express your feelings and emotions physically. Now, the first and most obvious of those is crying. And we often hear this thing of, oh, don't cry, and it's not good to cry. But what's happening when people are saying don't cry? What they mean is that they can't handle the fact that you're crying. Now, whether you want to cry or not, it doesn't really matter. But the point is, if there are moments when you do feel the need to cry, do you feel the freedom to do so? And this can be constricted. There might be times when you don't want to, and that can be processed and factored into this. But essentially, part of it is about having the freedom to cry when you want to. And so if there's any conditioning that has shut that down, then it needs to be opened back up again. Because how are you going to have confidence about processing emotions and feelings if there are lots of rules about what you're not allowed to do that naturally happens when a physical body processes feelings? It's understandable and natural that you're going to have anxiety if you have these rules, because you don't have the freedom to deal with things in the future in a natural way as you might wish to do so as they arise. For men also, of course, there's the added pressure and influence of this view that it's not manly to cry, or it's wimpy to cry, that you're a wimp if you're crying and you're a man. Now, that is frankly absolute nonsense, and it doesn't really help to give that any credence whatsoever. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't contexts and circumstances in which it's not in a man's interest to cry, particularly if it's in a violent or gang situation. There's a time and a place for honouring the wish to cry. But other than that, it's absolutely sensible and essential to our health that we allow ourselves to cry if we need to. So let's use the kissing consciousness tool to do a couple of clearings here then. So anywhere where you've picked up self-judgments, self-constrictions, that you're not allowed to cry in a way that's preventing you from doing so when it's safe to do so, would you like to let that go? And if so, would you like to ask your body if it would like to let that go? So we just want to clear that out, get rid of that nonsense. So physical expression or physical processing of emotions and feelings isn't just limited to crying. It's any kind of expression. So that could be screaming, or it could be shouting. Now, historically, there might be good reasons why people didn't want to do too much of that. In the past, there were lots of questionable rules about men in white coats coming to take people away if they screamed or shouted too much. That doesn't happen quite so much today. And although I'm not suggesting this is a permanent lifestyle that you scream and shout all the time, essentially we're talking about the freedom to do so now and again, where you just feel the need to express yourself. And that, again, is part of the natural permissions that you give to yourself and to your body to process emotions and feelings when you need to. So again, we'll do a clearing. Anywhere where you've picked up self-constrictions, self-judgments, that you should never shout or never scream, even when it feels natural to do so, would you like to let that go? And if so, would you like to ask your body if it would like to let that go? And so we can apply this same principle to all other forms of expression through the body. And it might be that you feel the need to go for a run in order to deal with a particular emotion or feeling that's arising. And I wouldn't even entirely rule out the possibility that your body is telling you to get some comfort food, or a bar of chocolate or something, or even an alcoholic drink. We don't want to entirely rule that out as a belief in such a way that it shuts down our awareness. And of course, this is what self-judgment and self-constriction does, is shuts down our awareness. So we want to open that back up again so that we can trust our natural wisdom to allow ourselves to process emotions and feelings through the body in a natural way. So again, we can do some clearings around that. Anywhere where you've got self-judgments which cause you to not allow yourself to express your emotions and feelings physically through exercise or activity, would you like to let that go? And if so, would you like to ask your body if it would like to let that go? And anywhere where you might have self-judgments around the idea that it can't possibly be the case that what my body's asking for in its wisdom is some junk food or some comfort food or even a drink, would you like to let that go? And would you like to ask your body if it would like to let that go? So we just want to open up the possibility there that you allow that to be a potential answer. And as part of that, we also want to go the other way. So let go of anywhere where you've got self-judgments that cause you to overly use those solutions rather than naturally apply other solutions by allowing your body to deal with emotions and feelings in a more healthy way. Would you like to let that go? And again, would you like to ask your body if it would like to let that go? So we want to create more space and possibility so that you can have no concepts getting in the way of your willingness and allowance of how your body's going to process emotions. So now that we've created that freedom for the body to process feelings and emotions however it wishes to, we come on to the next aspect, which is events of the mind. And the first thing I want to say to you here is that we need to get rid of this idea that everything that happens in the mind is personal to us, and that every single thought that's in our mind must be quote unquote ours because it's in our mind. Nothing could be further from the truth. And a metaphor I'd like to suggest to you is that imagine that you owned a public car park. Let's say you've got a car park near the beach where people pay to park their cars and access the beach. In that scenario, you own the car park, but you don't own the cars that are parked in there. Other people's cars are being parked in there. They're not yours. And this is exactly how it is owning a human brain or a human mind, is that other people will park their cars in your mind, their thoughts. They're going to park their thoughts in your mind. So it's important to understand that, because part of emotional freedom is having thoughts and beliefs arise and not having resistance to any of them. Now, some of them can be quite uncomfortable, some can be scary, some can be unpleasant. So it's incredibly important to realize that just because they're there doesn't necessarily mean that they are ours or they apply to us. And in particular, you can see it the other way around. So if you do have a thought that is uncomfortable to you or reflects something that you feel shame about or your conscience isn't right with, then that is a surefire way of telling you, and you can see then that that has nothing actually to do with you. The very fact that you're not comfortable with it, or maybe even be disgusted with your own thoughts, that shows that they're not your thoughts, that somebody else has got their thoughts in there and you've had to pick up on them. Well, why does that happen? Well, often because people don't allow us to be entirely who we are as being ourselves. They've got their own agendas for us and various other things like that. And on top of that, the brain is kind of like a sponge anyway. So there's all kinds of content and information being taken in there. We don't need to take any of it personally. Okay, so that's the first thing we can understand. So we can do a clearing around that. So anywhere where you've self-constricted or bought into self-judgments around the contents of your mind because you have been led to believe that it needs to reflect something about you, but actually doesn't necessarily do so, would you like to let that go? And if so, would you like to ask your body if it would like to let that go? So we're clearing that self-constriction out of the mind and out of the body there. And again, what we're doing is recognizing that we don't need to identify it with a thought just because it's in our own heads. Now, a second aspect to this is to realize that wisdom is allowing the nature of who you are. It's allowing who you are to be who you are and nothing else. So at any given time, you might have any worldview or value system, and whatever that kind of content arises for you in your mind, you can allow that to be the case. But the point is, can you? There might be times when you can't, and that also comes from cultural pressure, because the worldview, the values that you have, aren't necessarily accepted by the culture that you're living in. So in that situation, you have two choices. You can either allow yourself to be constricted and held down by the culture, the value systems and worldviews that you're living in. Generally speaking, I wouldn't recommend it. There could be occasions when it actually makes sense, because if there's for example, a threat to your physical safety, you want to not be seen as the outsider or the outcast who doesn't toe the line. But other than that, if you're going to have emotional and freedom in emotions and feelings, that means not having resistance to the contents of your own mind. And so when when you become aware that you have values and worldviews that don't necessarily meet other people's approval or match up, there's a requirement for you to allow that to be the case anyway. And so not feel that your worldview has to be constricted around set specific beliefs, but actually it's free to adhere itself and adjust itself to what's true for you, rather than the other way around, because the other way around you're never going to get freedom. You can get freedom if you allow wisdom and nature to be the lead, and then everything else follows on from that. So that's another aspect of how we get this freedom with events of the mind. We don't need to take them personally, and we can get to a point where we don't have to have any resistance to them, because we have no constrictions about what's true for ourselves. In your case, what's true for you. So again, I'll offer you a clearing for that. So anywhere where you have self-judgments and self-constrictions that you aren't allowed to expand or change your worldview and your value systems, instead it has to be constricted around the one you're familiar with, would you like to let that go? And if so, would you like to ask your body if it would like to let that go? So again, nice freedom can come from that when we realize that we don't have to be constricted by other people's values. So now that we have those two freedoms, freedom of events in the body and freedom of events in the mind, the next time something occurs in terms of that second definition of success, where our natural potential and our true personality and character has been constricted by the people or the society around us, we now have that emotional freedom, which means that when that resistance comes, rather than it being the invisible force field that it normally is that knocks us off course and causes us to think, okay, well, I won't try and write a book or create a business or something, I'll go and have a cup of tea instead, we can face any emotion or feeling that arises. And in Kissing Consciousness, we call that the elusive emotion. What is it that up until now you've been unable or unwilling to face? That actually, if you do face it, you can process the resistance and get back into that state of love consciousness and allowance of yourself, so that you can then go and achieve success in those endeavors. And what happens there is that when you do process that type of success that is difficult because you're constricted becomes that first type of success, which happens automatically in the flow, because you've transformed that constricted part of yourself into a liberated and properly functioning part of yourself. So that's how infinite emotional freedom is the key to that second type of success, which is really the one that everyone has challenges with. So I hope that was helpful for you. And one thing that may help further is the Kissing Consciousness Handbook. That's this book here that I wrote a couple of years ago. That's going to expand on a lot of the stuff that we've talked about today and build on the two qualities of love consciousness and fear consciousness, and explain how we use the Kissing Consciousness tool there, all kinds of things like that. It's going to help you move from fear consciousness to love consciousness, so that you're in that state of acceptance, self-acceptance, and you're in your what we call your yes permissions rather than your no permissions. So any constriction from others, that's historical constriction, has been dealt with, and then you're allowing yourself to fire on all cylinders. If you'd like to get a copy of that, it's at kissingconsciousness.com/book. And if you're somebody who likes a Kindle version or an e-reader, then you can get that at kissingconsciousness.com/Kindle. And if you'd like to give it a try first, something that's going to help is that I can offer you the first 2 chapters of the book absolutely free. If you go to kissingconsciousness.com/chapters, you'll be able to download chapters 1 and 2, and they will also build on what we've talked about today, looking at the difference between being in a state of flow and a state of stuckness, and also the power of love. What's the power of love? How do you harness it? It's all the same kind of stuff. You're moving from fear consciousness to love consciousness in both mind and body, so that you can be at one with yourself in what you want to achieve, rather than be at odds with yourself in what you're trying to achieve and being frustrated in. So thanks so much for watching. Got to say also thanks for the likes and subscribes. And also, if you require any one-to-one support with this, you can also find a link for that in the description below. I may be able to help you there. And good luck with dealing with the emotions and feelings and applying everything that we've learnt today. And I will see you another time.